This was a crazy chapter of One Piece. Gaban told Luffy how to kill a god, Luffy invited Loki to join the Straw Hats, the strongest giant in history was revealed, and after 27 years, we finally know the truth behind Shanks' great sacrifice. The cover page of One Piece chapter 1152, titled An Awful Day, features the completion of Yamato's delivery. Kawamatsu finally has the hat Tama wanted to give him. And somewhere along the way, I honestly forgot the whole point of Yamato's adventure, but here we are. And Ulti and Page 1 seem to be serving their new lord pretty well. We begin things with Imu's strange haki being felt in the realm of the dead. With that, Harudin told everyone to hurry onto the lift up. But he told Gerd to stay behind and left Loki in her care. She accepted without question. Gerd told everyone to be careful, and Road promised to give it his all, while the others told Harudin to hurry up and move himself. Chopper figured that he'd be better off staying with Gaban since the man's injuries were so severe. Luffy understood and left the little doctor to his work. But that's when Gaban called out to the young captain. The veteran pirate told him to be mindful of how he uses Conqueror's haki, that the enemies he now stands to face are not actually immortal by any means. So as opposed to being a totally new power or ability, Gaban's immunity counter lies in Conqueror's haki application. So the same way you need armament haki to deal with a Logia user, Conqueror's haki will be needed to deal with these so-called gods. Which further explains why the haki Joy Boy stored in Emeth was so unsettling. Luffy appreciated the heads up and promised to definitely save Colin and his friends. Hearing that made Loki sit up. He wasn't able to explain it before, but considering his own power and the fact that he's already faced them, Loki is pretty sure he can beat them. So he told his estranged brother to release him so he can join the fight too. Which is to say that Loki is also a user of Conqueror's haki. But the thought of Loki fighting for Elbaf was absurd to his brother. Harudin refused to ever do such a thing. That's when Gaban chimed in to say that Luffy isn't the only one in his group with access to Conqueror's haki. The future Pirate King's left and right wings both reacted. Sanji rushed up with a smug and pleased look on his face. He was sure that Gaban was talking about him. After all, his standing wasn't looking so good next to Zoro and Jinbei. So a new power-up was just what he needed to shift things back in his favor. All that nicotine must really be getting to his head if he thinks that he's above Jinbei and Zoro. Unfortunately for him, Gaban totally ignored the cook's yapping and spoke to Zoro. The swordsman was surprised when Gaban said that his body was in the process of getting used to Conqueror's haki. As it turns out, Zoro had no idea that he possessed the power. Luffy couldn't believe he didn't know, since it's been oozing off of him for all this time. Which is hilarious coming from Luffy, who was oblivious to all things haki for a very long time. Yeah, these guys are seriously the pinnacle of stupidity. At this point, the day the Straw Hats actually discuss their abilities with one another will be the day they find the One Piece, and the day that the world government falls. Gaban was actually pissed off by how oblivious Zoro was. He told his effective junior that haki is a power that needs to be understood and tamed. As a Yonko's close subordinate, Zoro should know his own haki well if he hopes to have his captain's back. Zoro was taken aback and could only apologize for his shortcoming. Zoro tends to take the harsh realities of piracy very seriously, so this is exactly the sort of conversation he needed to have. Mihawk is really something else for never mentioning it. And if this is Zoro before any level of mastery, let alone awareness, then we can expect him to get a whole lot stronger. And with that in mind, Sanji was scrambling. If Zoro gets another power-up, then where does that leave him? Too bad his comments were drowned out by the shouts of an angry Loki. The prince called his brother pathetic for allowing outsiders to save Elbaf when he's right here. And it looks like Sanji kept talking, but we don't know exactly what he said. So for all the Sanji fans, don't worry, Oda is definitely cooking with something for him in mind. Harudin shouted back at Loki. How could he be sure that his traitor of a brother wouldn't just help the world government and betray Elbaf all over again? With that horrible day in mind, Harudin refused to trust him. The other giants told their captain to hurry up. They wanted to stop the number of casualties from getting any higher, and that's when Luffy had a great idea for Loki. He finally told the giant prince to join his crew. That way, Harudin wouldn't be able to complain about his release anymore. The Grand Fleet member was aghast. Zoro strongly urged Luffy to reconsider. There was no way the big giant would fit on their ship, and according to Sanji, the guy eats even more than Luffy. The cook would be extremely overworked. But this time, reasons like that were not enough to dissuade Luffy. Elbaf doesn't want Loki, but he seems decent enough to Luffy. Plus, the captain can always just beat Loki up if he ever steps out of line, which is a very fitting outlook for the warrior of liberation. Luffy's desire to recruit Loki is already looking stronger than his desire to have Carrot or Yamato on the crew. Even so, Loki barked his refusal. Luffy hasn't totally won Loki's respect just yet, so this is to be expected. Let's not forget that Frankie refused to join both the Roger Pirates and later the Straw Hats. Loki wanted to join Rox's crew because he respected the man, so it's only a matter of time before Luffy proves himself to the overpowered giant and changes his mind. Because it seems like Luffy's mind has already been made up. Harald could tell that Luffy was following his instincts on this one, and Luffy was actually eager to see how the giant prince fights, something that was hardly a consideration for many of his previous prospects. The giant crew called for their captain yet again, and he promised to follow suit. Harald apologized to Luffy. Because Loki is a condemned criminal of Elbaf, he can't just hand him over so easily. But before he could leave, Harald was spoken to by Gaban. He urged the giant to release Loki. Harald snapped back that 14 years ago, Loki killed 113 members of the Royal Castle Guard. So he is the reason why there are only 2 of them left. He left Elder Ja Rule on the brink of death with a sword through the dome. Not to mention the savagery he subjected his own father to. This is clearly a very touchy subject, as the crew was very tense when he spoke about his criminal brother. Gaban was well aware of all of that. Even so, he admitted to feeling a strange release of haki from the castle that day. Looking back, both he and Shanks went to check it out, and it's possible that they didn't have the full story. Both Luffy and Harald were shocked to hear this. So much so that the giant captain told the others to go ahead without him. And Luffy was in the same boat. He told Zoro and Sanji that he'd catch up soon. Zoro groaned about this dumb Shanks thing. Luffy didn't like that Zoro was calling Shanks dumb, but Sanji was actually on Zoro's side here, and let their captain know that he's the one being dumb. This arc seems to have Luffy jumping for joy and doing tricks at the mere mention of Shanks' name. Mind you, many of his friends are bound and in danger right now. But Luffy cannot pass up a chance to hear about his idol. And this is of course setting us up to save the best for last. Just when things appear to be totally hopeless, Luffy and Loki will burst onto the scene. But for now, Loki turned to Gaban with a bit of apprehension. He also doesn't call the old pirate Yasan like the others. Gaban reminded Harald that although they have different mothers, he and Loki are still brothers. So who else would be better suited to get the truth out of the disgraced prince? Reluctantly obliging, the captain gave his brother 3 minutes to tell him what really happened 14 years ago. That if he truly considers himself to be a warrior of Elbaf, then he must swear to their gods that everything he says will be the truth. With that, Loki considered his brother's request to be a cruel one. He was asking him to relive the worst day of his life. While the others made their way up, everyone else listened in. Even while blindfolded, Loki had to shield his eyes. He really didn't want to remember. It was a truly awful day. Back then, Loki fell from the sky. He was on a cloud ship and was dropped off in front of the royal castle. Loki had returned after a seemingly long time abroad, and Elder Ja Rule arrived at a similar time. The elder asked Loki if he'd been summoned too. The big giant had a huge hammer over his shoulder, one that looked different from his current one. Loki reminded the old giant that the castle is his family home. He hadn't seen the old warrior in a long time, so he poked fun at his age. And here we get to see that Loki was more of a rude brat than some vicious tyrant. The comparatively small giant guards told him that King Harald was in the audience chamber. Loki had no idea what his dad wanted. He saw his old man as a government dog, so he didn't really respect the man's whims. Yet he still returned all the same. Selling out to the jerks who killed Rox, the pirate he most admired, was something Loki refused to accept. He wanted to point Elbaf in another direction entirely. But Elder Ja Rule figured that he was way too old for politics himself. Loki believed that that sort of thinking is what got them in this mess to begin with. Now they have an entire generation of peace-loving youngsters who are useless in a fight. The Elder saw the change as a sign of the times. He for one was glad that his descendants strove for peace instead of combat. Loki couldn't disagree more and called the Elder a coward for not preparing his kin. But their debate was interrupted by a strange sound that was coming from the throne room. The guards cordially greeted Elder Ja Rule. Their reaction to seeing Loki was hesitant, yet appeasing. And Loki responded like a jerk. One of the guards decided to go consult the king. But that really annoyed Loki since he was actually summoned and the castle is supposed to be his home. So he broke through the door with the guard on the bottom of his boot. Violence was not how modern giants got their way, but Loki did not care. The interior of the room was exposed. Loki began proclaiming his return to his father, but was cut short by what he saw. King Harald was pierced from all directions by his own guards. Elder Ja Rule's eyes went wide with disbelief as he shouted the king's name. And Loki was much the same as he yelled at the traitors. From there, we're taken over to Gaban's home in the Land of the Sun. It had a great view that included the castle. Gaban had a guest over and he was enjoying every moment of his stay. And that person was Shanks. Gaban realized that it had been ages since the two of them shared a bath. He figured it must have been 3 or maybe 4 years since then, but Shanks corrected him since at that point it had actually been 10 years since Roger's death. Gaban didn't expect so much time to have passed, but just laughed it off. He figured that all that stuff must feel like forever ago to Shanks. So now we know that time actually moves slower on Elbaf. We've suspected some sort of time distorting shenanigans for a while, but now we know the general pace. And since this all happened before his situation with Luffy, Shanks still has both of his arms here. And on his left arm, we can see a certain marking. And this symbol appears to be very similar to one associated with real-world Mendian black magic that dates back centuries. So this was more than likely a sign of Shanks' link to Immu, effectively a curse that he discarded in favor of Luffy. Shanks reflected on how much his life has changed since the crew split up. He admitted that he really just wanted to be a carefree pirate with Buggy, which only makes the moment of their separation that much sadder. But it's always nice when the best character in the series is mentioned. Regardless, there were many things in the world, like Elbaf, that Shanks wanted to know more about. Gaban, who was visibly younger than he is today, understood Shanks' predicament since he was a child of destiny. Something that was quite the heavy burden for Shanks to bear. But as much as we'd all like to know more, you know the rules. That's a conversation for another time. Instead, Gaban mentioned Dory and Brogy, the two giants that the Roger pirates met on Little Garden. And Shanks did remember, but they were interrupted by Ripley checking in on them. She asked if the water was hot enough, and Gaban was very pleased. She caught Shanks off guard, which is a little surprising for such a strong haki user, but I guess he was just that relaxed. She also gave him the nickname Shankun. So it should be pretty clear by now that the name Yasan came from her. Ripley is literally the biggest human lover on Elbaf. After their bath, Ripley offered them Lingon Berry Tart, which I now need to try, and enough drinks to drown them. Shanks really liked the layout of their human giant household. Gaban was kind of like a social hamster. Colin was still a baby back then, so his familiarity with Shanks makes total sense if the guy tends to stay with them when he's around. I also didn't realize that the mark on Ripley's body also extends all the way down her leg. Ripley asked Shanks if he has any interesting stories about her husband, and the redhead was ready to blab immediately. But Gaban let the hotshot know that he's not too old for a spanking. Sometime later, Gaban asked Shanks if he knew King Harald. Apparently, the Giants of Elbaf revered him like a god. And of all places, it turns out that Shanks met the king in the Holy Land, and they managed to get along just fine. So, just when we thought Shanks managed to beat the case, the rat allegations have returned. Shanks and King Harald obviously couldn't speak freely in the Holy Land, but now that they were both on Elbaf, he really wanted to have a conversation with the guy, and do so before it was too late. Gaban wondered what he meant. Before long, strange haki leaked out from the castle. The guards were slaughtered and the king was dead. Gaban and Shanks quickly sensed the oddity. Guards tried to escape the massacre, but someone closed the gate and left them for dead. Elder Ja Rule took his now iconic blow to the head and lost his memory of the day's events. And at some point, someone found the hidden treasure room and found the forbidden devil fruit that had been passed down within Elbaf for ages. The same power that Loki is said to now possess. But before we can hear that story, we need to know how King Harald came to be so beloved by his people. With that, we flash back to a very long time ago, 109 years before the present day. In those times, if you asked someone what the scariest thing on the sea was, the answer would always be the same: the giant warrior pirates. Back when Dory and Brogy were at the height of their infamy. In those days, just the sight of a giant ship was enough to strike fear in the hearts of men. And we'd see one such ship approach a human kingdom. Their leader heard that the country had a beautiful princess and decided to have a look for himself. This giant was just as responsible for the infamous reputation of his people. One of his subordinates peered in first, much to the horror of the tiny people. Then King Harald pulled the same move as his son and stomped on the guard's head, crushing him and the castle underfoot. We're told that Harald became king when he was 45 years old, which is only 15 by human standards. As the people scrambled and cowered from this horned titan among giants, he demanded their reverence as if he were a god. So yeah, King Harald was absolute scum. All the bad things they say about Loki don't hold a candle to his jerk of a dad. Loki inherited this aspect of his father, while his brother Haraldin is more in tune with their father's later years. Instead of going towards either extreme, a prosperous future for Elbaf is likely to be somewhere in the middle. This flashback definitely has my attention. I'm very curious how their different mothers may have influenced the king. Anything from this far back in history is bound to glean tons of interesting information. And the further along we get, the more willing Oda is to give us huge developments like the ones in this chapter. So I hope you're looking forward to seeing more. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.